Welcome back to Soaps and Sauce. According to CBS News, Kouri Richins, 33, of Utah, is accused of poisoning her husband with a lethal dose of fentanyl at their home. According to prosecutors, Richins called authorities in the middle of the night in March 2022 to report that her husband, Eric Richins, was cold to the touch. She told officers she had made her husband a mixed drink to celebrate him selling a multi-million-dollar home. She then went to soothe one of their children to sleep in the next bedroom. When she returned, she found her husband unresponsive and she called 911, according to prosecutors. Medical examiners found 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in Eric Richins' system.
A Utah mother who wrote a children's book about grief after the death of her husband last year has been charged with murder. Kouri Richins is accused of poisoning her husband, Eric, with a lethal dose of fentanyl. She told police she made him a vodka cocktail before bed and then went to check on their children. But when she returned hours later, she found him unresponsive. Joining us now to talk more about the case is forensic psychiatrist Dr. Dan Bober.
Dan, thank you so much for joining us. Before we sort of get into the case, because, my first thought was, what type of person would do something like this, allegedly, right? But I think people need a clear understanding of what you do, what a forensic psychiatrist is. We watch on TV, we see profilers, and that's kind of comes under the umbrella. But what do you do when it comes to, murder cases?
So forensic psychiatrists are at the interface of psychiatry and the law. So we look at things like criminal responsibility, for example, not guilty by reason of insanity. We look at competency to stand trial. So anywhere that mental health and the law come together, that's where we are evaluating various patients or defendants.
Okay, so when we look at this case, I think, part of the reason that obviously it's gotten a lot of attention is because we look at a mother who seems to be a devoted mother, wrote this very compelling children's book trying to help the mental health of her children after losing the father. And now, plot twist, she's been charged with his murder. The allegation is that she may have been poisoning him over a long period of time. You're the kind of person who looks at the mental health of someone who would be accused of something like this, just accused. But could you give us some insight into the type of personality that would do something like this? I'm sure you've seen other cases.
Absolutely. These crimes have been going on for hundreds of years, and it was only until the 20th century where we were able to detect these poisons that were being used. But interestingly enough, when the victim is a female, the perpetrator overwhelmingly is a male. When the victim is a male, the perpetrator is equally a female or a male. We also know that the people that poison these victims tend to usually work in the medical field, either doctors, lawyers, laboratory technologists, and that the perpetrators usually tend to be 5 to 10 years younger than their victims. And a full 20% of these crimes go completely unsolved. So we do have somewhat of a psychological profile. But remember, we're only looking at the people who actually got caught, so it's a very small sample size.
And is there a psychological profile associated with someone who chooses poison?
So it tends to be someone that wants to avoid physical confrontation, emotionally immature, cunning, manipulative, conning, someone who sort of doesn't want to get their hands dirty, if you will, so they want to do it from a distance. But yet, their victims tend to be intimates, people close to them, a spouse, a child, a friend, an acquaintance. So that tends to be who they are.
So let's talk about the children. I mean, what kind of impact would something like this have on them? I mean, it is unimaginable. I cannot imagine what a child will, we often talk about where people end up in life. And oftentimes it's so interesting. We have these discussions about what to feed children when they're newborn, what to read to them, how to get them to talk, how to get them to develop their personality and their brains, and yet
their self-esteem and all that.
All those things, right? That we spend so much time, millions and billions of dollars of books are written about this stuff, and yet one thing like this can have such a profound impact on a child's life. It's hard to see and hard to understand what might be waiting for them down the path.
And when you think about it, they've lost their father, and now they find out that their mother was the one that took their father from
Allegedly.
them. They've lost, allegedly, they've lost their sense of safety, security, and trust. Their whole world has been shattered, and in some ways, they feel like orphans if it turns out that their mother is guilty of this.
Yeah, we'll just reinforce the fact that she's been accused, but then a trial is
Charged but not
underway.
convicted.
But I think the sort of the duplicitous nature, at least at first blush, of writing a book to help one's child through a really bad time, and then being accused of perhaps, plotting the death of their own father this is like the kind of stuff that movies.
But here's
a
a question then for both of you.
Psychologically, I find writing the book very interesting. I look at it two ways. Is it some consciousness of guilt where she's looking for some redemption? Or is she so cold and calculating that she's looking to exploit it and profit from it?
So could the state mandate that the children go into therapy from the jump? I mean, this feels to me that you would have to get ahead of this because...
I mean, I think that's something. I don't know how these things unfold, but I presume that someone would have sort of custody of these children.
Yeah, very often the court system will step in, and whatever in the best interest of the child will happen. Perhaps they will be taken in by other family members or other trusted adults. That's usually what happens in these types of situations.
Dan, Bobo, really interesting talking to you. This is such a fascinating case. Thanks for spending some time with us.
Thanks, Vlad. Thanks, Anne-Marie. My pleasure.
And according to court reports, detectives said that they found evidence that Kouri had communicated with a person who was previously charged for possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. According to records, Richins reportedly texted this person to ask for some prescription pain medication for an investor who had a back injury, and she was given hydrocodone pills. Hope I didn't butcher that. About 2 weeks later, Kouri said her investor wanted something stronger and requested, according to her and according to records, some of the Michael Jackson stuff, asking specifically for fentanyl. According to reports, the person who allegedly sold her the fentanyl admitted that they did sell her opioid hydrocodone. I may have butchered that. I don't know how to pronounce it, spare me. Once, and fentanyl twice in February and March of 2022. Now remember, she called 911 in March of 2022, which would have been when she was sold fentanyl twice. It is alleged that on the night of her arrest, she deleted text messages. On the night of her husband's death, she deleted text messages before handing her phone over to investigators, and may have tried to poison her husband on Valentine's Day a month before his death. After that Valentine's Day incident, reports show that Eric apparently told a friend that he thought his wife was trying to poison him because shortly after having the dinner, Eric became very ill. So the hosts of Good Things Utah were interviewed, and this is what they had to say.
Joining me now, the hosts of Good Day Utah, who interviewed the seemingly grieving widow about her book, Kouri Richins, and Dina Manzanares. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it. All right, Dina, let me start with you. Did you see anything about her? Was there anything about the interview that you guys were doing with her that made you suspicious?
Nothing at all made me suspicious. I didn't have any spidey senses going off meeting and talking to her. I did think she was a little emotionless, maybe lacking a little bit of warmth, but everybody grieves differently. And I didn't want to judge. So I thought, maybe she's still numb. It's only been a year. Maybe she's on autopilot. I didn't have anything that seemed out of the norm to me.
Kouri, let me play a little piece of sound. This is one of the questions you actually asked her during the interview. Let's listen.
So you actually wrote this book with your children.
I did.
And it's only been a year. How did you process and say go from processing death to I need to write a book and help others?
You know, I just watched the struggle that my kids were going through. And I actually, I went on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and trying to find something that we could use to cope at nights. Nights are the hardest, it seems like, for everybody when, dealing with anything. But I just wanted some story to read to my kids at night. And I just could not find anything. I couldn't find anything that really, suited them or helped them find comfort and peace. And so, I was like, let's just write one.
Sue Ray, it seems that you thought at the least it was a bit odd that she was able to grieve and write the book and get it published within a year.
I think people process things in different ways in their own time. But yes, a lot of times on our show, Good Things Utah, it's a lifestyle show, and we allow people to share their stories and however they process it. And I put myself a lot of times in their shoes, and I think I would never be able to grieve in that amount of time and then write a book and then also take care of my 3 small children who are 10, 9, and 6. Yeah. So I did find it, wow, I can't believe that you've done it. So I needed to ask that question, like, how did you process this whole year and then write a children's book and then come on a show to talk about it?
So, Dina, I assume when you guys heard the news, you were stunned. What is the key evidence thus far that prosecutors have released against her?
Well, here's some really interesting things that happened. So she had come on the show. She wrote in to us. Our executive producer then booked her. We do the interview. Well, the night of the interview, an email comes into the station that's totally anonymous, but it says, she killed her husband. We all kind of looked at that, didn't think much of it at the time. We get a lot of crazy emails at times. Then a couple of days later, I got a personal message to my Facebook from an account that I don't know, you couldn't really see who it was, but it said, you need to investigate her. She's a suspect in her husband's murder. So at this time, we're starting to think, what is going on? But didn't know anything until everyone found out when this went public on Monday. So right now, we don't have any other information than what has now been made public. We were sent the search warrant. We're, watching for all of the new details coming down. We're completely shocked to have read through the search warrant.
And apparently they say that they believe it was a financial motive. I'm out of time. Sue Ray Chin and Dina Manzanares, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. Banfield starts now.
Court documents show that Eric Richins had intended to divorce Kouri Richins and had recently changed his will and life insurance policy. Warrants show that there was conflict between the couple over a $2 million home that Kouri Richins purchased with the aim to resell quickly despite the objections from her husband. Records also showed that Kouri Richins and her sister-in-law had a fight the day after Eric Richins' death at the family home. She subsequently sued for more than $3.6 million to remove the sister-in-law as trustee, stating that the prenuptial agreement between Kouri and Eric entitled Kouri to his assets if he died before they divorced. She is now facing murder and drug possession charges.